And it's all about making it easier on that next person whenever he or she is called into that position. Everything you do, everything you wake up and do is not for yourself. It's for that next person, that next generation.
This episode is brought to you by the Martin County Kentucky Farm Bureau Federation. While many know Farm Bureau for their top-tier insurance, that's actually a benefit of being a Federation member. Being a member means joining a voice that supports our local farmers and the Kentucky way of life. Your membership unlocks exclusive savings on everything from travel and hotels to farm equipment and health services. They are also deep supporters of our local community, investing in scholarships and programs for our youth. It truly pays to be a member. To join or learn more about their benefits, stop by the office in Inez or call 606-298-7721.
What if the next great political leader for Kentucky is not walking around in a big fancy state office right now, but rather walking the halls of a local small town high school? Today's guest became one of the youngest mayors in Kentucky's history, and he's showing that age does not get to define the amount of impact that we make. Do you know today's guest? Let's get into the episode and find out. Welcome to Me and Poverty, a podcast about breaking barriers, building bridges, and changing lives, one story at a time. Today's guest is a good friend of mine. We met in the same Leadership Kentucky program as a few of my other guests that I've had on the show, so I'm honored he was able to join us today. Today's guest is proof that leadership can start right at home, even in our small towns here in central Appalachia. He's a small town mayor with a very big heart for his community and the next generation as well. He's one of the youngest mayors in Kentucky's history. He's proving that leadership isn't about age or experience or any of those things. It's about the heart that you have for your community. I'm really looking forward to hearing some of his thoughts today. So without further ado, welcome to the show, my friend, Mayor Boone Bowling.
Well, Joseph, I think you're a little too kind to me, but man, it's an honor to be here, and I'm real excited about this. I know you've been doing a lot, and this is an awesome thing you've started here, and I'm excited to see what all lives it ends up touching.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, man, and you're going to offer a very unique perspective today, I think, for our audience. And there's some people out there that, you know, they're not sure maybe what they want to do specifically in their community, but they know that they want to be the hands and feet. They really want to serve. And I think you're going to give them some pretty good ideas of how to do that today. Let's get started, Boone. What would you say is your relationship to poverty? I mean, the name of this show is Me and Poverty. So what would you say is your relationship to poverty?
So my relationship to poverty is very unique, I guess. My father started out on not the best of terms as far as financially. You know, he was able enough to run a very successful business and turn it into something and create opportunities that, you know, I wouldn't have had if he hadn't done everything he had done. But, you know, in my seat, you know, poverty's turning into a much different thing, I suppose, as far as you see it a lot differently. You see at the national level how trends are going, how things are going. And, you know, it's very heartbreaking to see it at the national level, but now we're starting to see it even hit in our local levels. You know, poverty is often a very quiet thing. Nobody wants to talk about poverty. And, you know, some people want to think that they don't have a problem either. You know, or that the people that may be touched by poverty aren't theirs. Poverty is in our face every day, whether we realize it or not. You know, whether it's going into the school systems, seeing the same children with those hand-me-downs of 4 or 5 kids before them, whether it's, you know, driving down the street, seeing people walking and going to the different organizations that are there as community resources to help people that are on financial heartbreaks. You know, poverty is a part of life anymore, you know, and we've all got to do our part to try to reach out, touch, and even reinvigorate how we view poverty.
Yeah, there's been a history of stigma there, right? And so having that more community focused approach to solving it, I think, is great. I often tell people that we don't need big fixes. And I'm someone that's saying that from the perspective of, the LBJ came here in 1964 and declared his war on poverty right here in my hometown, right? So I've got some pretty good perspective on that, I think. We don't need big, quick financial fixes to this thing. We need more community-focused approaches, I think. So I appreciate you saying that today, brother. For our audience, how old were you when you ran for mayor, and what made you believe it was possible, even at your age, to do so?
So I'm actually going to take your question and I'm going to put a little rewind on it and give you my full story of how I got here. I went to Middlesboro High School, and when I remember being a freshman in that class, and man, I was one of the very few that had I had a good outlook on the city of Middlesboro. I had a good outlook for the life that we get to choose to live here where we are. And then that was always something like I just had an overabundance love for my city, not even for my community, not even for any aspirations. Just as a whole, I had a love for where I lived. But I remember we were sitting in a business class. It was actually a Miss Margaret Bruner's class. We were sitting in class, and it was one of the elected courses. So you were in there with freshmen, sophomore, juniors, seniors, whoever signed up for the class was in there. But now, just because you're in there with all those people don't mean you always had roll call. Me and my freshman group of 3 were sitting at one end of the table, and there was a senior group of about 5 or 6 sitting at the other. I just remember hearing them talk about how terrible Middlesboro was, how much they couldn't stand it, how much they didn't like it. And I remember I was like, I would love to run for mayor one day. I was just, I was 14 years old in there, and just I remember leaving that and saying, that would be so cool to say. What an honor it would be to say you're the mayor of Middlesboro. Like there could be no greater thing you could be than the mayor of Middlesboro. And I guess that seed was in the back of my head. But at the same time, I never had ambitions of trying to make it a career. That's never wanted to run for politics. But I was like, man, that would be so neat. But I remember sitting there and that seed was in my head. Went on, finished high school, went to college, and my senior year in college, I went and studied construction management. In my construction management class, we went on and we had a class called Capstone. And it was a very self-guided class, I guess. You still had your assignments and stuff you had to do, but it caused you to do a lot of really, I guess, soul searching and inner thinking. We were going through that class. I just remember sitting there and saying, what? Like, yeah, I want to go back home. I want to start getting involved with my community if I'm going back home because, there's not much I'm going back to, but I was one of those that I came home every weekend in college too. So like it just meant I didn't have to be a commuter up there to Richmond during the week. I could just stay home, and I was fortunate enough to get a job with the one of the only general contractors here in Middlesboro at the time. Worked there with them, got a job, and then when I came back but in that capstone class after I landed that job, I said, it was a challenge yourself. What are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to run for city council. Not really knowing what city council was or what to do about it, but be honest, I signed up for it and ran it, and didn't have a true understanding for city government yet. I was like, well, I'll learn it on the fly. I've learned this much. I can keep learning. So ran for city council. And then while I was actually in college still, I guess I would have been 22 at the time when I signed up to run for city council. And so fast forward there and get to election time, I got elected when I was 23. And then I served my 4 years on council, and I'm a big man of faith, and I'm a true believer in the Lord above, guiding every step you could possibly take. So I got on my hands and knees, prayed about it long and hard, and the gentleman that was the mayor at the time was actually kind of one of those mentors to me. I always had a lot of respect for him. The thing is I didn't think he was doing a bad job. I just felt like I could do a little bit better. And it was never. The good thing is it wasn't anything personal between him and I. After I got down the altar and got to where I was praying about it and doing my reading, I ran for it, and I was elected at filed when I was 26 to run, was elected at 27. At that time, I was the youngest in City of Millsboro's history. And funny thing is, I found out I was actually the 33rd mayor of Middlesboro's history, which means there have been more presidents of the United States than there have been mayors of Middlesboro, which means, I mean, it's just that much better. When I was 14 years old, saying it's the best job in the state, I mean, there's more presidents than there have been mayors of Middlesboro. So I consider myself that much more, that much more blessed.
Yeah, that's too cool, man. I appreciate you giving that perspective. I hope you're enjoying this episode of Me and Poverty. I just wanted to take a quick second and tell you about our Season 2 sponsor, Appalachia Reach Out, or ARO for short. Founded in 1972, ARO is a ministry in Eastern Kentucky devoting their time and effort to being Christ's love in action. Based in Martin County, but also serving Perry County, Kentucky, and Scioto County, Ohio, ARO supports families by meeting basic needs through their food pantry, their thrift store, while also partnering in addiction recovery, education, and community development through their work and witness teams. Fun fact, we've even had Appalachia Reach Out's Executive Director, Dwayne Mills, on this podcast before. So please go check out that episode last season. I'm going to have a link to ARO's website in the description of this video. Guys, I'm sure they would love your support, whether that be financially or volunteering your time. With that being said, let's get back into the episode. What would you say is something that you wish young people knew more about working in local government?
So that's kind of an interesting thing. When I came back home and while running for city council, I really got to start putting my roots back home because that's where I knew I was going to be going. And I found that, I was able to learn more just by going and actually going to the meetings. I'd never been to a fall festival meeting. I didn't know when they met or anything. And, everybody was always quick to say, you can't ever get involved. You can't do this. Why are they doing this? So I just started going to the meetings. Same way with our Main Street. I found that the more present I was at these meetings, to not go and say, well, we need to do this or we need to do that, but just going out with almost with your hat in your hand and saying, how can I help? What can I be a part of? I'm here just to fill a void. And people are really open arms to want people to be involved.
You just made me think. You took me back to my college days, my undergrad, and you got me thinking. I had a professor once that told me, not just me, but told our class, first day of class, they're handing out syllabi, all the teachers are. And one said, guys, this is college. I was a freshman. Guys, this is college. 70%, it's probably the best advice I ever got. So 70% is probably not factual, but it made a lot of sense. They said 70% of this class and most classes that you will face is just you showing up. You show up, you'll at least get a C and you'll pass the class. So I kind of think about that, right? With you and the approach that you were taking. Hey, just like you said, you show up, hat in hand. Hey, I'm just here. I'm just showing up. And, I'm not going to sit at home on the couch, complain, or, I'm going to just show up. So that's good, man. That's a really good perspective. Be honest. How many people, and we're not going to throw out names, but how many people said that you were too young? How many people told you that, Boone? Anybody?
Whenever I was running for city council, I did hear a lot about my age. That was, I guess, the most shocking thing, though, is like I said, when I got involved, when I became there was close to 21 organizations that I was going to their monthly meetings back home. I didn't know we had 21 organizations in Middlesboro. But, I started going to those and just sitting at the table and listening. My age definitely came up during my council times. There was a lot of people that were, more willing to, I guess, I had more people that were willing to show me favor or, select me on the ballot because of my last name, not because they knew me for my first name yet. And that was a good gauge for me so when I ran for city council is a 2-year term. So, and you've got 4 years in between mayor. I had to run twice before I was able to run for the mayor to stay on the city council for 4 years. In my first election, I was the second most vote getter behind one other gentleman that ended up resigning because he took over our street department at the city before our first meeting. So that meant I was technically the most highest vote getter that took office. It was me and another gentleman. He was 48 votes behind me.
And how big is your population in Middlesboro?
9,303.
Okay, I think that's good perspective for our audience too to know that.
I was probably around the 1,400 mark, I believe, on votes. And the next gentleman behind me was at 1,350. So in that next election, when we re-ran for city council, there was a bigger difference from first to, I was the most highest vote getter, but there was a 400 vote difference between myself and that same guy that finished second. When I first ran for council, a lot of people were concerned about my age, and then once they saw that I was more than just, wanting to get somebody's vote, wanting to do this, wanting to do that, but actually wanting to get involved, that part really started to go away. And I gained a sense of security and trust in the community that, people know that, hey, I care about this town and that's it. So whenever I ran for mayor, don't get me wrong, there's still some people that, I've got long hair, I've got a beard, and I'm young, and that ain't everybody's cup of tea. But some people like a little lemonade, and that's where I was trying to get that lemonade voter. So there was some people that had a lot of concerns more on my council race than there was my mayor's race. Because once I proved myself as a council member, there was that sense of security of, well, he does care.
That's really good and makes a lot of sense. And me knowing you personally, I can see all of that. So that's really cool, man. What would you say are some of the biggest challenges that small towns like ours in Kentucky face?
I would say some of the biggest problems that we face right now are actually kind of, I don't know if it's a good thing and bad thing, I suppose. Participation's the hardest thing to get out of young people, I think, in our areas. But at the same time, you're almost seeing a restoration of family values too. People are for the first time in a long time, seeing value in their time. And they're spending their time the way they want with who they want. And they're not wanting to give them off those civic organizations people previously had been. In my personal opinion, I think it's, and I don't, very rarely will I bring up a problem and no solution, but it's one that I don't know if it needs a solution or not. I about think people have got to be willing to serve, but I don't know if it's going to be your younger people because, like I said, you're seeing a restoration of family values, in my opinion. And I think more people are starting to care about their family, care about their community, but they're being a part of of themselves, of their family before they are their community first. And I don't know. I don't always, although the community may suffer for it, I'm not going to say that's a bad thing though either.
Right, especially someone that grew up in poverty like I did, and there was almost zero focus on the family in my scenario. So part of me can't fault them for that necessarily. What would you say, Mayor Boone, are some of your biggest wins that you're proud of as mayor?
I would say some of the biggest wins are my goals and my ambitions are to really emphasize trying to build the quality of life in Middlesboro, because I do think the way our whole world's kind of moving, you're able to really see people with opportunities they've never had before back in their hometowns. From my graduating class, I was one of the only ones that moved back home after college. Now, those people I graduated with, 10, 12 years ago, they're now seeing opportunities in their hometown that they never thought possible. And they're wanting to move back home because they can go and work anywhere. And I think you've got a lot of people that are learning how beautiful Eastern Kentucky is and how great we really are down here, that are wanting to really explore those new opportunities, reimagine their hometown almost. The biggest wins we're seeing, like we're renovating our parks. That's one big thing. I've got a couple other bigger projects I've got on the tee right now. I've not quite swung at them yet, but I think we're going to, in the next 6 months, there's going to be several things come out that I've been working on for 2 or 3 years that they're finally going to be coming to fruition, that I'm going to be very proud of and excited for. We've launched as a city, we've now actually got into retail recruitment. We're now going and trying to get, retail businesses to want to come to Middlesboro. One thing I'm learning is, as beautiful as our mountains are, they're also very restrictive. We don't have flat ground in Middlesboro, and where these developers have got to have it. And it's not the fault of the people that have the property. It's just way the cookie crumbles. The retail recruitment, like we just had a Hobby Lobby open. We're now getting a flash steel manufacturer, and we've got 3 to 4 other businesses that are dying to come into Middlesboro. But, we can't quite get those in here yet because we just don't have the available space right now. Ain't nobody's fault. It's just, like I said, that's just the way the cookie crumbles.
Yeah, No, I mean, it makes sense. And met with a few companies trying to bring in some more enterprises and that sort of thing in previous careers.
Mm-hmm.
So I get where you're coming from, man. It's hard because they want promises.
They want
And
promises, they want commitments, but they don't want to make them on the other end. Yeah,
that's right.
yeah,
That's right.
they want you to stick your neck out there, but they can't promise to stick theirs. And I
Yep.
understand that too, because sometimes ain't nobody wants to
Yeah, they're in
ain't nobody
business,
want to
you
get
know?
bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Knowing you personally, I know you lead with your heart. And I've seen that countless times, and we've spent, some long evenings together at events. For our audience, and maybe for that younger generation that have a perception of politics, and they're gearing up, they want to put their hat in the ring one day. But could you educate them on what it really means to lead with your heart?
I can do my best on it. As far as any young person wanting to get into politics, if you're going out here because you want to leave your mark, don't get in politics. Go run a business. Go make a donation to a city to build a park in your name or something. But don't get involved in your politics if you're doing it for yourself. The first thing you got to do, and I think one thing I really appreciate about this job is it doesn't matter how good of a job I do. It don't matter how long I'm here. Don't matter how great I am. There's going to be a next. And it's all about making it easier on that next person whenever he or she is called into that position. And that's everything you do, everything you wake up and do is not for yourself. It's for that next person, that next generation. And I've since being in office, I've become a father. And if you want to talk about a whole new motivator for life, for a whole new perception for how you want to prioritize the youth and the opportunities here and the quality of life. Oh my God. Like I thought I cared about the youth before, but now it's like, man, I got to do everything I can. I want that little girl to stay here. I want to be here the rest of my life, but I got to do whatever I can to make her want to be here.
There's a big word that I throw around here lately that just died. That's legacy. Too, right? When you're looking at what you're about to pass on one day, yeah, it's important to be focusing on that.
And that was something when I first started, in the back of my head, I cared about being the best. Here's what I'm going to do. Here's what I want to see done. And I learned rather quickly that one, you can't do it all, and two, if you're doing it for you ain't going to go far. And that's the thing is you do have to lead with your heart. You got to get down, get on your knees and pray. I mean, in my opinion, the good Lord will guide you on every step of the way. He's always there trying to talk to you, trying to guide you. Whether you listen or not, it's a different story. I do think he'll try to whisper to you sometimes, and then if that don't work, he's got that 2x4 and he don't care to use it, and he will use it. So that I would say, just if you want to get involved, go be patient at the table. Don't get ahead of yourselves and go there with the right intentions. I've never had an issue with somebody bringing me an issue since being the mayor. Even if I'm in the wrong, if I've got to be the one to say, hey, I made a mistake, I'll be the first one to admit it. But I'm always more willing to admit my faults, my mistake, if the reason for somebody's asking is with good intention and not good attention. Intent rather than attention, in my opinion, is the biggest thing. Go into anything with good intentions, and the outcome's always going to work.
Let's do a fun question. So, if every mayor came with their own superpower, what would you say yours is?
Well, there is a perception that when you get elected, you're kind of like the Black Panther, and you drink from this vibranium. That's the often perception, but I can assure you, I would love that. I don't know if I could have a superpower. I would probably want something like Doctor Strange, because then I could build whatever I wanted pretty quickly.
That's a really good, yeah. I like that a lot, actually. What is something that you wish everyone knew about Middlesboro, Kentucky?
If I could give you anything about Middlesboro, and just as a little tidbit to stick with everybody, it's a very wholesome community. We are a community that cares, and sometimes we care a little too much, and our emotions get the best of us. But man, if you want a community that's going to care for you, that you're going to have an opportunity, no matter who you are or what it is, you've got it here at Middlesboro. And I think that's one of our biggest strong points is, we're still very big on our tradition, but, we are a place of opportunity too.
Yeah, that sounds like a great place to live, my friend.
Oh, yeah. Hey, we got room for you, Joe. Come on down. I'll find you a place.
Hey, never say never, man. God has drugged me and the Little family kind of all over Eastern Kentucky, and I don't care to go a little further south. You
I
know, that'd be
come
okay.
get as southeast as it gets, baby.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What do you say to that high schooler that thinks, and you touched on, different people's voices earlier. What do you say to that high schooler that thinks their voice doesn't matter, that they're not heard? What would you give them?
I think sometimes it's very easy to build up a perception that's not there. And sometimes, and especially the way social media is going, it's very easy to get offended by anything and everything. And things are I will say this, most of the time, things are not the way they seem to be. It's a whole lot different when you go and ask that person that's supposedly saying this or saying that, and they say, "What are you talking about? Why would I ever do that?" Sometimes it's not as bad as you think it is. I guess would be the one thing. Like go get involved before you cast judgment. Before you say you feel this way, go make sure you got your facts straight. And because it don't matter how thin you slice it, there's two sides to every story.
That, and I think there's just a little too much of that victim mentality, which I think we could go really far down the road on that. But
I'll tell you another one that's been weighing on my heart, and I don't know what the Lord's doing with it, but there's one that's been weighing on me, and I ain't quite put my finger on it yet. But there's also comparison. If everybody would put their blinders on in a sense of being willing to look at the good, maybe not picking. If you look at the good in your community, not the bad, and you don't start comparing the good in other communities to the bad of yours. It goes both ways. And that victim mentality, though, that comparison, that can get you down a bad rabbit hole and lead you to a lot of places you don't want to be.
you mentioned casting judgment, and it's kind of easy to do that, and I feel like there's a lot of that, no matter on either side of the aisle, right? I think that's fair to say. I think that might be a good segue into a question that's been in the back of my mind. So, how do you, as kind of a nonpartisan mayor, how do you walk down the middle there, man? Like when you got the somebody on the left or right or red or blue, like how do you deal with that?
That is my favorite part about the mayor's job, and it's one reason why it's the only public office I would ever want to hold. Our races are, as you said, nonpartisan, which means we're not left, we're not right, we're just community driven. I think that is the greatest thing about the mayor's job. It is, and you can get so much more done because it doesn't matter what your party is. It just matters that you are the person representing your community. And when you go to talk to some of the legislators and different things, there's never been a legislator that's asked what my political affiliation is. They don't care. They just know that, hey, you're the leader of your community. What do you need? And I think it's a great way to give opportunity to say it's just community first.
Yeah, and I love that. And I'll be honest, when we joined our Leadership Kentucky program, I was a little worried. I'd been around a lot of politicians in my day, and I was like, oh boy, we got a mayor, and he's, but man, I don't know that I've met someone, and I believe in giving people their flowers while they're living. So I don't think I've ever met someone with a bigger servant's heart. And I can say that because you're a true friend. And, there's some friends that went through that program with us. I'm not going to throw out many names here or anything, but there's one that works for a certain company that we both know. First name Josie, last name Cruz. Now that guy, he's so selfish. I don't know what to do.
I mean, you gotta watch that little fella.
I've begged him to be on this show, man, and we haven't gotten it to align yet. We're going to.
Well, don't worry. Well, let me go ahead and do a plug. Joseph Cruz is one of the most influential, happiest people you'll ever meet. And the one good thing is now I can say his name was mentioned on this podcast, which is going to make him definitely have to go back and be on this.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right. That's perfect. I need that.
Yeah.
So that's going in my back pocket for later.
But there is one thing, I guess, in regards to one thing, and also to me, as far as the mayor's job is not political, but it's really cool. If you go into any elementary school, you go in there and you ask your average fourth or fifth grader can list you three people. They can list you the president of the United States, the governor of their state, and their mayor. They can't tell you who their representatives are, who their senators are, who their councilmen are, but they can tell you who those three people are. And I think that in itself is it's a very wholesome a very, very cherished perk to this job too.
When you have the right heart about it, and that just gives you a little sense of pride in a healthy way, man, that's too cool. That's a dream come true. So how do you stay grounded when things do sometimes maybe they get tough or get kind of political or whatever? Like, how do you personally stay grounded?
I've been doing things a little differently lately. I've actually kind of turned off my social media. I stay off the social media. I don't watch the news. I've found that if worry creates me more problems than anything does, and there's nothing I've picked up off Facebook that's helped me be able to address a situation. It just causes me to create worry about a situation that's not happened. And most of the worry that I've built up doesn't seem to happen. I've worried about more stuff than I've actually been affected by. But the worry is what's actually affecting me at the end of the day. So, I guess I'm fortunate enough that, where I am in my faith walk, I at this point, I stay loyal to my walk, and I trust it ain't going to be nothing I get hit with that's too big that I can't handle. I do trust that whatever the outcome is going to be, it's going to be, and, chicken ain't nothing but a big old bird. We'll just take it and go with it and deal with that problem as it comes.
Yeah, I like that. And I was listening to an audiobook, travel around the state quite a bit, and I was listening to an audiobook the other day, and it said what you focus on will expand. And I'm like, dang. Like, that gave me some good perspective, like, if you could go back, give teenage Boone Bowling, before the mayor title got added, teenage Boone, give him some advice, what would that look like?
But I would say just really key on the patience, focus on what you can control, move forward the way you see it and the way you feel led to do it. Don't worry about the ramifications if it's the right thing to do. Don't think about the politics. Don't think about the things that are surely to come, the worry that's coming. Concern yourself with what you can control, and the rest of that thing's going to fall where it's going to fall. And it's either going to be your problem or somebody else's. And if it's your problem, you fix it. If it's not yours, try to help somebody else fix theirs, and that's all you can do.
I don't know when your faith journey started, Boone, but for me, that focus on what you can control, that I think that's great advice, because oftentimes there's the scripture of lean not on your own understanding, right? I think it's Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. But we often we want to control everything, and thankfully God leaned in and whispered softly, spoke to my heart early, and said, one, you can't take on all this worry. You can't physically, you cannot do it, and nor should you, because I love you enough to do it for you. If we can grab that early in life, I think that helps with some of the things that you were talking about earlier, and maybe we don't get offended so easily, and maybe there's not huge mental health struggles and all of the things, right?
I think the sooner you realize that there's going to be bad things that are going to happen to you, you're not being punished. It's just we live in a sinful world, and there's going to be bad stuff that happens to you, and there will be days that you're going to get punched in the mouth, and then you're going to have to eat it and get through it. But I mean, it's not that he's left you or he's abandoned you. He's still right there to guide you through it. And the more you look for him, the more faithful you stay to him, the farther he's going to take you.
Yeah. My wife and I, we've been through a few things over the last few months, good and bad, but I've spent the last 42 days in a different chapter of Job. So it's funny that you bring this up, right? Because I've started every morning with the next chapter of Job and his journey, his faith, his struggle, all the things, right? So for anybody listening, if you're in the thick of it, just go read you a few chapters in Job. And what is something outside of your mayoral job and responsibilities? What's something outside that realm that just really brings you joy?
It's not even close now. When I first got elected, I got joys out of going places. I used to love to travel, and now I've got more opportunities to go travel now since being the mayor. But now I don't want to. The only thing I want to do is go home and be dad. My daughter is the greatest blessing I've ever had. And watching her grow the way she's getting so big each day, and just watching their minds work, that the biggest blessing I've ever received. And the only thing I want to be at the end of the day is you just want to be a good dad. And it comes so naturally. And everybody, because there was always a lot of talk about becoming a father and how, well, you better be ready. Your life's getting ready to change. And you hear them old timers tell you that at McDonald's every morning. Oh, you don't know what's coming. And you know what? Hey, they were right. But the one thing that they didn't tell you is that life does not change. Your whole life realigns. You have instantly found your purpose as to why and what you look forward to. That's they are why you're waking up every day. All those sleepless nights, I wouldn't trade them for nothing. I mean, it's the greatest thing that could ever happen to you.
You mentioned the word your life realigns. That word has meant a lot to me lately. I've got a mentor in my life that has really, really pushed the word alignment on me. And he talks about being vertically, which is important, as far as visualizing, being vertically aligned to God's will for your life. And then once you are vertically aligned, then you can horizontally start making differences. You'll have direction. You can make impact, and you'll know which way to go. And it's just, you think of it that way and then this way. And I get that. And, I have a 4-year-old boy, and what a joy. And I often talk about, I have a few mentor programs I do with the I want to say trouble, but at risk, marginalized young men, boys, and I'm trying to give them pieces of wisdom and how to become a responsible young man and future father, all that. Some of them are fathers now that are in high school, and so when I'm talking to them, I get to tell them, "Hey, I get to be the father I never had." For me, it's pretty easy because mine was not present, But even if maybe your dad is present, but I think that's still something we should always pursue because there's gaps, right? That we had relationally or emotionally maybe with our fathers, and everybody does. And so it's kind of like, hey, in what way could you be the father that you never had?
I'm very, very fortunate that, my dad's one of my best friends, and then he's an easy one to look up to. I mean, I grew up as one of the kids that, my dad's Superman and he always will be. He's a mountain I can never climb, and he'll to the day he's no longer with us, he'll be the man that he can whoop me every day he wants, and there ain't nothing I can do about it. But I've always heard two things, and I've now really seen it. When you have a daughter, you're trying to create her standard for what she should look for in somebody. When you have a son, you're training your replacement. And once I heard that, I understood a lot about my father and what he's, even those hard pills that I had to swallow, I understood why he was doing it. And it was all out of love, and it's always out of replacement. I mean, your dad's it's one of the only people in the world that ever wants you to do better than they did. And like I said, I don't have a son. I've got a daughter, and I hope she knows when she starts dating, or can start dating whenever she turns 40. I hope she knows the standard that her boyfriend should set. And what she should expect out of somebody.
Yeah, and what she's willing to accept. You're someone that I know cares about making true change. And we talked about different ways to do that in our communities through the program that we were in. Shout out to the Leadership Kentucky Bright program, the 2024 class being the best one ever. Someone that is trying to make true change for the better, how do you avoid burnout?
I don't think it's something you can avoid. I find myself, anybody that ever says they don't get burned out in these leadership roles, especially when there's not really there's no financial gain to these things either. That's whenever it's not motivated by money, it's just motivated off purpose or willingness to want to change things. Burnout's going to happen, but you've got to have that support team around you. And the hardest thing for me been lately is I've had to come to the ugly realization that as much as I think I can't do it all. The standard of perfection that I set for myself is not always achievable. But now I've got people that I'm surrounding myself with that I'm looking at that have abilities to do stuff. If I pass it off to them, they can get it done. Even if it's not up to what I think it should be, sometimes their 100% is going to be much better than my 15%. And having the willingness to let somebody carry that for you, that baton across the finish line is a hard thing. But I've been very fortunate with the team that I've now got around me, both in my personal and professional lives. Burnout's going to happen, but as long as you're staying that encourager for everybody else, that's where my heart comes in. You bury your selfishness, your burnout's going to go away, and you get down to the root of caring about your people and who you're around. Then that it's going to re-motivate you, and you're going to get burnout sometimes, but it's something you can get over really quickly.
Yeah, and I've been around quite a few successful business folks, and one thing that I learned years ago is you've got to have that team that fills all of your gaps, right? And you hire your weaknesses, and so you got to learn to trust, man. Even though when it's your name on it, or whatever that looks like, it can be hard, but if you're going to be successful, and here's the thing, if you're going to make a bigger impact, if you want to stay small, sure, you can say me, and maybe own your little thing. But if you're really going to help a community like 9,000 people, you got to learn to trust the team some, right?
I've really kind of tried to think of as, is delegating that off to where other people are set up to succeed. Like I said, if you don't ever burn out, it means one, you're not following through on anything. But, burnout's also sometimes a direct reflection of caring. You only get burnt out if you care too much, really. And it's not a bad thing to care too much.
Yeah, I have that conversation with my pastor quite a bit. What's the best piece of advice that you've ever been given? And maybe who gave it to you? You don't have to say a name, but what were their role maybe in your life, if you want to talk about that? If not, just what's the best piece of advice you've received?
Okay. Weird scenario for you. There is one I learned lately, and I want to give a shout out to our Bright class. Karen told me one time, Karen Butcher, she said, no is a full sentence. Always loved that one. And that's my favorite one I've heard in the last 10 years or so. But I guess you don't always have to explain everything as to why you feel that way. No is a full answer. You don't have to explain yourself sometimes. If no is, there was a life lesson I learned when I was little, and it's always stuck with me, and I think it really helped on my decision making, or how I respond to decisions that are even maybe not favorable to me. When I was in 5th grade, I loved playing basketball. It was my favorite thing in the world was playing basketball. So my dad had a couple contractors. They were working and paving. He was getting a new sidewalk put in, and they were concrete workers. And I had been really working on my jump shot, really on my new basketball goal. And I remember I got home from school and went out there, and those contractors were out there. They had lowered my goal and were dunking on it. They broke my rim, and I had gotten home, and then my dad got home, and he saw me tore up, and I was upset. And he goes out there that next morning before we're going to school. I remember I was watching from the porch how he was getting ready to get on these guys and get on to them. And next thing you know, we're sitting there, and he goes up to him and says, "Guys, y'all broke that kid." He went up to him and was nice to him. And I was like, "Dad, they broke my goal. How are you being nice to them?" He said, "Son, if I'd have gone up there screaming from the high places, would you think they would have wanted to help?" He said, "I go out there and I treat them like, humans, like, honest mistakes happen." And next thing you know, they were out there striping my new basketball court that I didn't have striped. They wanted to do that to make up for it. Whereas if he'd have gone out there getting all over them, they probably wouldn't have done that. And watching him teach me how temperament, even in a time of uncertainty or, maybe a place of emotion, how you control yourself during those decision making times still matters. And it can gauge the outcome drastically.
I'll be honest, that's been a tough lesson for me to learn. And I wish I had somebody when I was young, like your age that you're talking about, pour that into me. And because I lacked emotional intelligence. And not all that long ago, I had to learn a few hard lessons. But now I look at my son, and I'm pouring that into him early.
Awesome.
And so that makes a lot of sense, buddy. Mayor Boone, thank you for joining us today and sharing your heart and sharing with our people that, hey, our hometowns, they're not necessarily waiting for permission or care about age or anything like that. We're just looking for more servant leaders. And that's exactly who you are, my friend. And thank you so much for coming on the show today. For those listening, if you enjoyed today's conversation and it spoke to you and you want to see more episodes like this, or maybe you're trying to invest in our next generation, be sure to like and comment on this episode and subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss out on future episodes. And remember, keep sharing stories. See you in the next episode.